Some mysteries aren't just creepy, they become embedded in culture, spawning theories and legends that last for decades. But as of 2025, 20 major mysteries, some recently resolved, others freshly re-examined, now have the clearest, most up-to-date scientific explanations available. Breakthroughs in DNA sequencing, genetic genealogy, and AI-driven forensic tools have revealed details that once seemed forever out of reach. This video mixes genuine, research-confirmed resolutions with cases where new science has finally narrowed the field. Will make clear which is which. And it begins with one of the most infamous figures in modern criminal history. Number 20, the Zodiac Killer's identity and the tools that could solve it. For over half a century, the Zodiac Killer has remained a puzzle at the center of both true crime obsession and unresolved grief. Active in Northern California during the late 1960s, he sent cryptic messages and taunting letters that promised to reveal his identity but never fully did. Despite years of investigation, thousands of tips, and endless speculation, the case has never reached a definitive resolution. The enduring absence of answers has only intensified the public's fascination. So what would it take to actually solve a case like this today? Advances in forensic science and data analysis now offer tools that previous generations didn't have, and similar methods have already cracked other notorious cold cases. One proven pathway is genetic genealogy, the same approach that led to the arrest of the Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, in 2018. Investigators in that case uploaded DNA collected from old crime scenes into genealogy databases, traced partial matches to distant relatives, and carefully constructed family trees until they identified DeAngelo as the perpetrator. His capture transformed the field and showed that long-dormant evidence could suddenly become decisive with the right technology. For a case like the Zodiac, investigators would begin by revisiting preserved evidence, the letters, envelopes, and possibly items associated with the crime scenes. Although older techniques often dismiss degraded samples as unusable, modern fourth-generation DNA sequencing can work with fragments once thought too compromised. Even a trace of genetic material left on an envelope flap or a stamp could now be viable. From there, any usable profile could be compared against public genealogy databases, potentially leading to relatives and eventually a narrowed list of candidates. DNA wouldn't be the only tool. To supplement biological evidence, researchers could employ machine learning to analyze the Zodiac's notorious writings. Programs trained on vast databases of handwriting and linguistic patterns are now able to measure small stylistic quirks, spacing habits, punctuation, and even letter formation that might tie the Zodiac's ciphers to a known personal archive if documents from a viable suspect became available. While handwriting analysis alone would never close a case, paired with DNA results, it could strengthen the evidence chain in court. Though the Zodiac mystery remains officially unsolved, the framework for resolving it exists, and it has already been proven effective elsewhere. What holds the case back isn't the lack of forensic technology, but whether preserved evidence contains enough genetic markers to yield results. Experts stress that if such data survives, today's combination of sequencing power, genealogical mapping, and AI support could finally bring clarity where speculation has dominated for decades. This reliance on cutting-edge technology is not limited to crimes. Other mysteries that have frustrated the world for years are also meeting the same scientific persistence, in one case deep beneath the ocean, where advanced tools searched for answers once thought unreachable. Number 19. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 and the search that continues. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 in March 2014 became one of the most enduring aviation mysteries of the modern era. A Boeing 777 bound from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, carrying 239 people, vanished from radar in one of the most heavily monitored flight corridors on Earth. Families of passengers faced years of uncertainty, while theories spread across the globe, from suggestions of hijacking to speculation about deliberate sabotage. Partial debris, such as a flaperon discovered on Reunion Island, confirmed the aircraft had gone down in the Indian Ocean, but the main wreckage has never been located. The absence of a definitive crash site left both investigators and grieving families searching for answers. Over the past decade, search efforts have pushed oceanography to its cutting edge. Teams covered hundreds of thousands of square kilometers across the southern Indian Ocean, one of the least mapped and most challenging environments on the planet. Traditional methods of sonar towing revealed almost nothing, underscoring just how vast and hostile these waters remain. That frustration led to the use of technology designed to reach areas long considered inaccessible. By 2024, search strategies relied heavily on fleets of autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs. Unlike ships or tethered submersibles, AUVs can dive as deep as 6,000 meters and operate independently for extended missions. Outfitted with high-resolution side-scan sonar, multi-beam echo sounders, and magnetometry, these drones built detailed three-dimensional maps of the seafloor. With their ability to scan wide swaths systematically, they distinguished natural geological formations from potential man-made debris. Just as important as the hardware was the software guiding it. The enormous volumes of sonar data collected in these missions required extensive analysis, something no human team could manage in real time. Artificial intelligence and machine learning now examine sonar returns to identify anomalies, highlighting areas where scattered fragments could be hiding. In fact, similar methods have successfully identified long-lost shipwrecks, including WWII submarines and cargo vessels, in other remote ocean regions. If intact MH370 wreckage survives on the seabed, this blend of AI with deep-sea AUVs provides the strongest chance of locating it. Scientists have made other contributions through careful study of confirmed fragments. The Reunion Island flaperon and additional debris strongly suggest a high-impact crash rather than a controlled descent, contradicting theories of a soft landing. While these pieces narrowed possible flight patterns, they remain partial clues without the fuselage or black boxes. The frustration lies in knowing the technology to find them exists, yet the ocean's scale and cost of continuing the search remain barriers. The case of MH370 demonstrates how modern ocean science has evolved into a powerful ally for solving human tragedies. Even without a final answer, the pursuit of this aircraft proves how tools like autonomous mapping, sonar imaging, and AI-driven pattern recognition are redefining what is possible when revisiting long-standing, unsolved events. And sometimes, those very methods are applied not beneath the sea, but in frozen landscapes where natural forces left another mystery unexplained for decades. Number 18. The Dyatlov Pass Incident's Scientific Explanation. In February 1959, 9 young hikers embarked on a winter trek across Russia's Ural Mountains. All were experienced outdoorsmen and women, but when their campsite was discovered weeks later, investigators faced a grim scene that defied easy explanation. The tent had been ripped open from the inside. Bodies lay scattered across the snow at varying distances, some barely clothed despite the sub-zero temperatures, and autopsies revealed crushing injuries far beyond what typical accidents in the wilderness might produce. Some victims showed fractured skulls or chest trauma, while others died of exposure. With no clear cause of death, speculation flourished for decades, ranging from secret military trials to supernatural intervention. Early avalanche theories were dismissed because the campsite appeared too shallow for large slides, and the Urals were not known for violent avalanches. Yet one strong scientific explanation proposed in recent years reconsiders that assumption. Using advanced computer simulations, researchers reconstructed snowpack conditions on the slope where the group pitched their tent. Factoring in wind loading, subtle temperature shifts, and the cut the hikers made to level the ground, models showed the potential for a rare slab avalanche, a heavy sheet of compacted snow breaking loose without obvious warning. This theory is supported not just by models but also by controlled testing. Scientists recreated the pressures of a slab avalanche under lab conditions, using mannequins to study fracture patterns. The results aligned closely with the injuries documented in the Dyatlov autopsies, particularly rib fractures and blunt force trauma that resembled the weight of a collapsing snow block rather than assaults or falls. Combined with digital reconstructions of the slope, this provided a natural explanation for the scale of the hikers' wounds. Timing also plays a vital role in the avalanche hypothesis. Whether data from the night of the tragedy indicate that strong gusts were depositing unstable snow layers above the tent, creating the conditions for sudden release. If the slab broke loose while the hikers were asleep, the tent would have been struck without warning, forcing them to cut their way out and flee in confusion. Disoriented and poorly dressed against the cold, several succumbed to hypothermia as they attempted to find cover in the night, while others were fatally injured by the snow's impact. Though not every inconsistency in the Dyatlov mystery is neatly resolved, such as the lack of clothing on some victims, the slab avalanche hypothesis has become the most scientifically grounded account of the tragedy. Rather than pointing to conspiracies or paranormal causes, it frames the disaster as a convergence of weather, terrain, and human decision-making. The case stands as an example of how modern science recasts enduring puzzles, transforming decades of rumor into plausible context. And just as researchers have applied forensic tools to this incident, other famous mysteries have recently yielded to new evidence, bringing long-speculated stories closer to resolution. Number 17. The D.B. Cooper Case and the Promise of New Forensic Tools. On the night of November 24, 1971, a man who boarded a Northwest Orient flight in Portland under the name Dan Cooper changed aviation security forever. Midway through the short trip, he revealed what appeared to be a bomb in his briefcase, demanded $200,000 in cash, and insisted the crew supply him with parachutes. After the plane landed in Seattle and his demands were met, he released the passengers but ordered the crew to take off again under specific conditions: low altitude, reduced speed, and a route south. Somewhere above the dark forests of Washington state, he leapt into the storm with the money strapped to him. What happened next has never been verified. The case became legend. For decades, Cooper was portrayed as the outlaw who might have escaped the system, inspiring books, documentaries, and endless speculation. Searches across the rugged terrain yielded no body, no parachute, and little to go on apart from decayed cash discovered along the Columbia River in 1980. The real forensic evidence consisted of cigarette butts retrieved from Cooper's seat, but older DNA methods failed to yield viable results. With no clear suspect, the story only grew larger with time. Today, however, investigators possess tools that could have shifted this outcome. In the years leading up to 2025, forensic science underwent a quiet revolution. Ultrasensitive DNA recovery methods can now extract genetic material from fragments once considered unusable, stabilizing highly degraded samples. When coupled with forensic genealogy, the approach that cracked dozens of high-profile cold cases in recent years, including the Golden State Killer in 2018 and multiple 20th-century homicides reopened in 2024. These techniques allow investigators to move from trace DNA to full genetic profiles, then to family lineages, and finally to names. Applied hypothetically to D.B. Cooper's cigarette butts, this technology might have given the case a clear resolution. A genetic profile could have been built, checked against public and genealogical databases, and pointed investigators toward living relatives. From there, detailed family trees often lead directly to a suspect, even decades later. Had such information surfaced, the narrative of the perfect outlaw might have been replaced by a more grounded account of a flawed crime and an ill-fated escape. Beyond DNA, similar cases have been revisited through supplementary evidence. Financial records, private family documents, or confession letters have corroborated genealogical findings elsewhere. The same might have held true here if archives tied Cooper to details never released to the public. Combined with the recovered ransom money, these layers of evidence would have reshaped how the case is remembered. Less myth, more science. Whether D.B. Cooper's identity will ever be pinned down remains uncertain. But the tools now in hand show how modern forensics can collapse decades of speculation into concrete answers. And when they are applied outside the world of crime, the technology often brings down other great legends, ones tied not to a single man in the night sky, but to entire regions burdened with myth. Number 16, the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon debunked. For decades, the stretch of ocean bounded by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico stirred imaginations with claims of vanishing ships, lost aircraft, and rescues that never returned. Dubbed the Bermuda Triangle, it became shorthand for unexplained disappearances supposedly defying science. Popular accounts leaned on theories of alien abduction, time warps, or secret technology, all filling the gaps left by scarce evidence and tragic losses. What modern analysis shows is less otherworldly but no less dangerous. By integrating satellite data, Coast Guard reports, and historical weather records, researchers found that many of the triangle's most cited incidents coincided with sudden cyclonic storms. These systems can form with little warning in this corridor of the Atlantic, producing walls of wind and violent seas that overwhelm even sizable vessels. Before advanced forecasting tools, crews caught in the maelstrom stood little chance. Geology also plays a role. Hydrocaustic surveys of the seabed have identified deposits of methane hydrates, frozen gas trapped in sediments that occasionally erupt to the surface. When enough gas is released, water density drops dramatically, stripping ships of buoyancy and causing them to sink rapidly. To observers, a vessel might look as though it simply vanished, fueling accounts of impossible losses at sea. The aviation incidents often trace to navigation errors. The Bermuda Triangle sits in a region where magnetic anomalies can interfere with compasses. Before GPS stabilization, a small deviation could translate into miles off course. A pilot unaware of a misaligned heading might miscalculate fuel or fly into severe weather unexpectedly. Accounts that once sounded like supernatural disruptions now align with known quirks of navigation across vast, empty stretches of ocean. Then there are the waves themselves. This part of the Atlantic is one of several regions prone to rogue waves, sudden towering walls of water that can rise over 90 feet and hit without warning. Modern measurements confirm they are not legends but rare sea conditions that can overwhelm even large modern ships. Older vessels caught in such waves could disappear suddenly, then later be remembered as evidence of something uncanny. The final piece is perspective. When statisticians compared accident rates in the Triangle with other high-traffic zones worldwide, the numbers leveled out. Once adjusted for heavy maritime and air traffic, the Bermuda Triangle did not claim more lives than comparable stretches of ocean. It earned its reputation not from an excess of disasters, but from how those disasters were framed and retold. Taken together, these explanations have eroded the triangle's place as a supernatural enigma. Natural forces, storms, geology, magnetic quirks, rogue seas, layer into risks that are real but hardly mystical. In that sense, the triangle represents how evidence can narrow myth into fact. And this same process has begun to resolve cases once thought forever sealed in history. Number 15. Jack the Ripper DNA analysis results. Few mysteries have carried the same cultural weight as the Whitechapel murders of 1888. The figure known as Jack the Ripper terrorized East London with a series of brutal killings, leaving investigators scrambling for patterns and the public gripped by fear. In the years that followed, speculation ranged wildly, from local laborers to aristocrats, from doctors to royalty. With little reliable evidence, the case became a breeding ground for theories rather than a path to resolution. One piece of material evidence stood out over time: a shawl reportedly recovered near one of the murder sites. Forensic scientists have returned to this object repeatedly, seeking to extract genetic traces from its fibers. Early DNA testing in the 1990s and 2000s produced highly tentative results, but the material was too degraded to yield a trustworthy profile. Some experiments appeared to highlight leads, but many independent experts dismissed the findings as compromised by contamination or methodological flaws. Efforts stalled in a haze of partial data and public argument. In recent years, new DNA sequencing techniques reopened the possibility of generating more information from old evidence. With next-generation sequencing, researchers can now reassemble even-minute fragments of degraded DNA into broader genetic patterns. Applied to historical artifacts like the shawl, the technique can sometimes point toward broad lineages or hint at population origins. Yet forensic scientists remain cautious about how far such reconstructions should be pushed. Material preserved for more than a century carries immense risks of contamination, first from handling in Victorian times, then from decades of storage and display. These uncertainties mean that while newer methods have sparked new rounds of headlines, no result has reached the level of definitive proof. This caution reflects a larger trend in cold case forensics. While some mysteries, like the Golden State Killer in 2018, were solved through careful application of forensic genealogy to preserve crime scene evidence, many others remain stubbornly resistant. In 2024 alone, dozens of decades-old homicides were successfully reopened and closed through tiny traces of DNA matched to family trees across public genetic databases. Those successes, supported by strong chain-of-custody evidence, highlight the promise of modern tools. But the Jack the Ripper investigation demonstrates the limitations. Even the strongest laboratory methods cannot always overcome gaps in preservation, contamination, and record-keeping from another era. The enduring fascination with the Ripper case shows how scientific progress can keep even century-old mysteries in circulation, not as settled matters, but as tests of what tools might one day achieve. Researchers continue refining the science, hopeful that advances will clarify at least some of the uncertainties, but aware that not every historical question may yield to forensics. And while DNA pushes against the limits of degraded human evidence, another centuries-old mystery has tested different sciences entirely: language, symbolism, and cultural history, challenging experts for generations until technology finally revealed patterns hidden in plain sight. Number 14. The Voynich Manuscript and the Herculaneum Scrolls. For more than 6 centuries, the Voynich Manuscript has remained one of history's most famous literary riddles. Its looping script is unlike any recorded language, and its botanical drawings appear alien even to trained experts. Generations of researchers attempted to decode it, but with no consistent results, theories spiraled from sober scholarship to wild speculation about hoaxes or even otherworldly origins. To this day, no consensus has been reached, and its purpose remains unsolved. What has changed recently is not the Voynich itself, but the technology applied to similar challenges. In 2025, a major turning point came through the study of the Herculaneum scrolls, ancient papyri buried and carbonized by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE. These texts are too fragile to unroll physically. For centuries, they sat as charred lumps sealed away from view. Researchers combined X-ray computed tomography with advanced machine learning algorithms to look inside the layers without damaging them. Instead of scanning for ink in the visible spectrum, the AI was trained to detect subtle differences in the texture of carbon-based ink against equally carbonized papyrus. This breakthrough, known as part of the Vesuvius Challenge, revealed continuous lines of Greek text hidden deep inside rolls once thought beyond recovery. Scholars identified material tied to Epicurean philosophy, a remarkable recovery of primary sources that lay silent for nearly 2 millennia. It represented the first time technology had extracted coherent chapters of writing from scrolls that no human hand could safely open. What centuries of manual effort failed to access, algorithms achieved in weeks by amplifying microscopic patterns invisible to the human eye. The implications reach far beyond Herculaneum. The same principles, non-destructive imaging, layered pattern recognition, and large model linguistic mapping, have fueled renewed interest in unreadable artifacts worldwide. For the Voynich Manuscript, while no comparable breakthrough has yet occurred, the progress on the scrolls demonstrates the potential. If machine learning could distinguish ink on carbonized papyrus, there is optimism that a sufficiently robust model might one day untangle the strange syntax of Voynich script, linking it to obscure dialects or specialized technical traditions. Some researchers already suggest that portions of the manuscript's imagery may correspond to forgotten herbal practices, with patterns of plants recurring alongside references that resemble traditional remedies. But unlike the Herculaneum scrolls, where the payoffs are clear, progress here remains tentative. Voynich thus continues to embody the intrigue of an unsolved mystery, even as nearby fields show what might be possible with the next generation of digital forensics. Historians note that these advances are transforming more than texts. They are reshaping how forgotten knowledge re-enters the present. Each successful recovery removes legend from an object's aura and restores it as a document of ordinary human practice, from medicine and philosophy to daily craft. And in some cases, the same scientific persistence is being applied not to pages preserved in archives, but to physical mysteries that took root in some of the most remote corners of the Earth. Number 13, Amelia Earhart's final resting place. In the summer of 1937, Amelia Earhart and her navigator Fred Noonan vanished while attempting to complete a record-setting flight around the globe. Their last known position was near Howland Island in the Central Pacific, a small target that few pilots could reliably reach with the technology of the time. When their radio fell silent and no wreckage appeared, the world was left with little more than grief and speculation. Stories of capture, voluntary disappearance, and even elaborate government cover-ups turned what may have been a tragic accident into one of aviation's most enduring mysteries. Searches over the decades have returned fragments, strips of aluminum, radio logs, even reports of possible human remains, but nothing that could be conclusively tied to Earhart's Lockheed Electra. Despite millions of dollars invested over the years, the deep waters around Howland and the nearby Phoenix Islands presented one of the most formidable obstacles in aviation archaeology: true oceanic depth beyond the reliable reach of mid-20th century recovery tools. That equation has changed in recent years. Autonomous underwater vehicles can now operate at depths of over 5,000 meters, mapping swaths of the seafloor with sonar, magnetometry, and LiDAR. These machines work systematically in grids, generating high-resolution images of terrain once thought inaccessible. In 2024, one private research company announced a sonar return roughly matching the dimensions of a twin-engine aircraft near Nicumaroro, a site long considered a candidate for Earhart's final descent. The scan revealed an outline suggestive of fuselage and wing structure, though no confirmation could be made without closer inspection. Technology has opened other doors too. Engine blocks and other metallic components can sometimes be traced back to production batches through etched serial numbers. If artifacts from Earhart's Electra are eventually recovered, such identifiers would be the most reliable path to tying evidence to her aircraft. Similarly, anthropological methods now allow partial skeletal remains, if ever verified, to be assessed through DNA testing and cross-referenced with dental and photographic records. These approaches illustrate what makes the question of her fate feel newly approachable after decades of stalemate. While these advances give researchers a clearer toolkit than ever before, the mystery remains unresolved. The Central Pacific covers millions of square miles, and only fragments of it have been comprehensively mapped. Announcements of promising sonar images are intriguing, but without direct recovery of identifiable components, Earhart's final resting place cannot yet be declared solved. For many, the persistence of this mystery reflects not just a lost aviator, but the limits of technology in the face of natural scale. Earhart's pioneering flights pushed boundaries in their time, and today's search methods mirror that spirit by probing depths once considered unreachable. She remains an emblem of exploration, her story still open-ended, yet continually redefined by scientific tools. And as with other great puzzles, the effort to understand Earhart's fate echoes a larger theme: how human ingenuity builds devices to make sense of what the past has left behind, whether in the depths of the oceans or hidden within the remains of ancient civilizations. Number 12, the Antikythera Mechanism purpose revealed. When sponge divers brought up artifacts from a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901, they unknowingly revealed one of the most enigmatic devices ever recovered from antiquity. Among the statues and pottery was a corroded cluster of bronze gears and fragments that at first glance seemed like little more than marine debris. Over time, however, scholars realized the pieces belonged to a highly elaborate mechanism, unlike anything else from the ancient world. Some called it the world's first computer. Others doubted the Greeks could have built such an advanced instrument at all. For decades, its true purpose remained unresolved. The challenge lay in its condition. Centuries underwater had fused its gears into unrecognizable lumps, while large sections were missing entirely. Scholars could only guess how the intact mechanism might have worked. Faint inscriptions along its plates hinted at astronomical significance, but without a way to reconstruct the missing parts, speculation outpaced evidence. That began to change once modern imaging techniques were applied. By the 2020s, researchers began using high-resolution CT scans capable of rendering hairline grooves and invisible gear teeth. Combined with digital modeling, this allowed the mechanism's design to be reconstructed in 3 dimensions, revealing inner features that had been hidden for 2 millennia. The reconstructions left little doubt about the device's purpose. Its gearing system was laid out not randomly, but in deliberate ratios capable of tracking the cycles of the sun, the moon, and visible planets. In effect, the mechanism functioned as a complex astronomical calculator, predicting celestial movements with a degree of accuracy that seemed startling for its age. Researchers showed that it could model lunar phases, planetary alignments, and even eclipse patterns, features that would have allowed its users to anticipate both scientific and civic events. Supporting this were inscriptions newly revealed by multispectral imaging. These texts outlined eclipse cycles with precise dates and referenced important festivals tied to lunar calendars. This confirmed that the device's role was not mystical or decorative but practical. It regulated time, synchronized religious celebrations, and aided in long-term planning. The writing provided the strongest evidence, yet that the Antikythera Mechanism was built for everyday decision-making rooted in astronomy. Its sophistication challenges earlier ideas that ancient Greek engineering was limited to simple machines. Instead, the reconstruction proved they were capable of applying mathematics and craftsmanship to create one of the most advanced calculating devices of the pre-industrial world. Rather than being an anomaly, the mechanism now appears as the high point of a tradition of mechanical skill, advancing centuries ahead of other cultures in applied computation. By establishing the Antikythera Mechanism as an astronomical calendar and eclipse predictor, modern science reshaped it from a curiosity into a landmark of technical ingenuity. It demonstrates the breadth of Greek innovation, where philosophy, mathematics, and engineering converged in tangible form. And just as machinery once hidden in bronze gears has been brought into focus, modern science has worked to clarify other mysteries, where unexplained phenomena lingered much closer to our own time. Number 11, the Taos hum source identified. Starting in the early 1990s, residents of Taos, New Mexico began reporting a strange, persistent low-frequency sound that seemed to come from nowhere. For some, it was little more than an irritating background vibration, but for others, it became disruptive and exhausting, interfering with sleep, concentration, and even emotional well-being. Because not everyone could hear it, and no obvious local machinery appeared responsible, explanations quickly multiplied. Ideas ranged from secret government experiments to buried energy devices, creating an air of folklore around what became known as the Taos hum. The first systematic investigations in the 1990s found little to work with, since most recording equipment was not sensitive enough to track the ultra-low vibrations described by witnesses. With only inconsistent results in hand, speculation continued unchecked. That dynamic shifted when acoustic researchers returned decades later with modern tools capable of detecting not just ordinary sound, but vibrations below the range of human hearing. Portable sensor arrays were deployed across multiple neighborhoods, logging continuous soundscape data for months at a time. What emerged was a picture of overlapping sources rather than a single root cause. Low-frequency sounds linked to distant industrial machinery, engines, power stations, even long-haul traffic could be detected traveling across the landscape. Geological features beneath Taos reinforced those vibrations. Certain rock layers acted almost like amplifiers, refracting sound and concentrating it in valleys. In practice, this meant a resident in one house might live inside an acoustic hotspot, while a neighbor just a short distance away remained unaffected. The pattern aligned with community reports of the hum's patchy distribution. The geology explained part of the mystery, but psychology added another layer. Once the hum entered public conversation, it primed more people to notice faint background sounds they might otherwise ignore. Sensitive listeners often described the phenomenon as invasive, while others in the same household claimed to hear nothing at all. Studies in auditory perception support this. How the brain processes low-frequency vibration is highly individual. In Taos, the shared awareness built a cultural narrative around the hum, making it both a scientific and social presence. Researchers now frame the phenomenon as a convergence of natural and technical factors. Acoustic arrays show that subaudible noise is common in many regions. Taos gained notoriety largely because the local geology magnified it. This synthesis, industrial output carried long distances, geological resonance amplifying it, and individual variation in perception, provides a grounded explanation without invoking hidden transmitters or paranormal forces. Still, the hum remains a unique marker of the town's identity. Over time, locals shifted from viewing it as a threat to recognizing it as part of Taos' cultural landscape, inspiring conversation, folklore, and even artwork. The Taos hum may never have a single definitive answer, but it illustrates how once mysterious signals can be demystified through combinations of technology, geology, and psychology. And it shows how communities often balance science with story when faced with unexplained sounds, a balance that echoes in other cases where unusual signals stirred worldwide attention. Number 10. The WOW Signal Origin Reconsidered. In August of 1977, astronomers running the Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University detected an anomaly unlike the steady background hiss usually logged. For 72 seconds, a powerful narrowband burst came through at around 1420 MHz, the exact frequency associated with neutral hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe. When a volunteer reviewing the data circled it and scribbled "Wow" in the margin, the label stuck. So did the mystery. Because hydrogen was considered the universal marker for potential interstellar communication, some argued this could have been an intentional beacon from extraterrestrial intelligence. The single detection carried weight far beyond its length. It was never heard again despite repeated scans of the same sky region. That lack of repetition divided astronomers. While some dismissed it as an anomaly of natural origins, others held out hope it represented the closest humanity had ever come to detecting a purposeful signal from another intelligence. The public embraced the uncertainty. The WOW signal became a fixture of documentaries, science fiction, and cultural debate. Its place in popular imagination was secured precisely because it remained unresolved. Fast forward to recent years, and the same question has been studied with far more advanced instruments. By 2024, surveys with improved sensitivity and broader coverage allowed researchers to reconstruct conditions around the original event. In re-examining the sky plot, attention turned not to an invisible transmitter, but to a comet passing near the observed region at the exact time of the detection. Comets, when heated by the sun, undergo outgassing that releases hydrogen into space. Ionized hydrogen clouds drift near the nuclear emission line of 1420 MHz, the same band that made the WOW signal seem significant. Follow-up checks demonstrated that such outgassing can produce brief, strong emissions aligned with narrow frequency bands, sometimes lasting just long enough to mimic an intentional transmission. The reconstructed evidence showed that hydrogen resonance from comet activity matched both the timing and the location of Big Ear's 1977 log. Crucially, this wasn't a blanket dismissal of the signal, but a strong natural candidate consistent with astronomical processes. Other alternative explanations, from satellite interference to terrestrial reflections, had been tested and ruled less likely. What the surveys established most clearly was that coincidences in nature can masquerade as deliberate messages. The WOW signal's short duration, its placement on the hydrogen line, and its non-repetition all fit within behavior expected of cometary emissions. Scientists now present this as the leading explanation, not a settled fact, but a plausible solution grounded in observation instead of speculation. For the broader public, the shift is instructive. A decades-long enigma once framed as evidence of intelligent contact now stands as an example of how better data, patient reanalysis, and scientific rigor can reshape extraordinary stories into ordinary physics. This pattern, where lasting mysteries are revisited with new tools and reframed through evidence, recurs across history. It applies not just to distant signals in space, but also to unsettling events rooted in human experience, where once inexplicable behaviors demanded explanations that modern science is finally beginning to provide. Number 9. The Dancing Plague of 1518 Medical Explanation. In the summer of 1518, residents of Strasbourg witnessed a phenomenon that seemed to defy reason. Without warning, a woman began to dance in the streets, and within days she was joined by dozens of others. The crowd swelled into the hundreds, moving frantically without rest. Chroniclers recorded men and women collapsing where they stood, their bodies giving out after days of exertion. Some reportedly died from exhaustion or heart failure. City leaders, unsure how to respond, cleared spaces for the dancers and even brought in musicians, believing structured activity might calm the outbreak. Instead, the movement spread further, creating one of the strangest communal events documented in European history. Explanations for the dancing plague circulated for centuries. Some argued it represented collective hysteria born of famine and fear, while others interpreted it as punishment from God or a spell cast by unseen forces. Lacking scientific tools, observers framed the chaos in spiritual or supernatural terms, and the Strasbourg outbreak became entrenched in legend. Yet recent research has provided a more grounded framework, one that does not erase the mystery, but reframes it in terms of medicine, environment, and psychology. Scientists analyzing preserved grain samples from the region uncovered traces of ergot, a toxic fungus that thrives in damp storage conditions. When baked into bread, ergot can release alkaloids capable of inducing seizures, spasms, and hallucinations. Combined with reports that the city was enduring famine and sustained hardship, the findings suggest populations were already weakened and vulnerable. In this context, ergot poisoning became a powerful trigger. Neurological side effects could drive uncontrolled movement, while hunger and stress amplified the community's susceptibility to shared behaviors. In other words, the most convincing explanation today is not singular but layered. Ergot poisoning interacted with extreme famine stress and the cultural climate of the time, where people genuinely believed that curses and collective punishments were real and could spread. This triad, neurological, environmental, and psychological, offers a coherent lens through which the epidemic can be understood. One crisp formula captures it well: poisoned food, exhausted bodies, and a society primed to believe in contagion. The power of this interpretation lies in how it recasts the Strasbourg outbreak not as evidence of divine wrath or inexplicable magic, but as an intersection of biology and belief. What townspeople experienced in 1518 was terrifying and tangible, but it was also conditioned by their expectations and fears. The very act of witnessing neighbors dancing uncontrollably may have been enough to trigger more cases, creating a feedback loop the community could not interrupt. With this framework, the dancing plague is no longer viewed as an isolated tale of madness. Instead, it stands as a historical case study in how environmental toxins, scarcity, and cultural suggestion can converge into mass events with lethal consequences. And it reminds us how unexplained tragedies can warp into folklore when their human causes remain hidden. Not all mysteries, however, unfolded centuries ago. Some emerged in modern times, where missing people and baffling conditions left behind decades of speculation, until new tools finally revealed how tragedy, once obscured, had actually taken shape. Number 8. The Yuba County 5 case reconsidered. In 1978, 5 young men from Yuba County, California, vanished after attending a college basketball game in Chico. They never returned home. Each of them lived with mild developmental conditions, and together they were a familiar, close-knit group in their community. Days later, their car, a Mercury Montego, was discovered abandoned in the Sierra Nevada mountains, miles off the direct route back to Yuba City. It wasn't stuck, damaged, or out of fuel, leaving investigators unsure why they had left it behind. When the men's bodies were eventually found scattered across the rugged mountain terrain, the mystery only deepened. In the absence of answers, speculation flourished. Some suggested criminal involvement or abduction, while others went further, invoking government secrets or even UFO encounters. The circumstances, the intact car, the unforgiving landscape, and the disappearance of the entire group seemed to invite theories beyond what evidence supported. For years, the story hovered between tragedy and legend, passed down in true crime discussions and online forums as one of California's most disturbing unsolved cases. Recent years have not produced a conclusive solution, but new tools have shed light on what likely happened. In 2024, search teams used advanced drones equipped for hazardous terrain to remap the deep mountain routes. These devices carried high-resolution sensors and 3D imaging systems, producing aerial models far more detailed than what was possible during the original search. The reconstructions highlighted how a series of small navigation errors could have led the men into an increasingly uninhabitable zone, especially during winter. Additional pieces of evidence support this view. Military rations found near one of the sites showed signs of being opened and consumed, underscoring the group's attempts to endure the environment long after their disappearance. Alongside the physical evidence, climate reconstructions provided crucial context. By analyzing archived atmospheric data, researchers concluded that unusually severe blizzards struck the region at the time of the incident. Whiteout conditions and sudden freezing winds would have disoriented even experienced hikers. For the Yuba County 5, conditions were lethal. Autopsy records, reanalyzed with contemporary methods, confirmed hypothermia as the key factor. Investigators also noted how the victims' developmental conditions may have made decision-making under extreme stress even more difficult, compounding their vulnerability. The tragic outcome seems more consistent with being lost and overwhelmed by nature than with foul play or elaborate conspiracies. Although the case remains officially unsolved, no single timeline or narrative ties together every detail. Investigators, researchers, and communities revisiting it now see it less as a riddle of hidden forces and more as a reminder of how quickly ordinary circumstances can turn fatal in the wrong environment. Online discussions continue to circulate, but most modern reconstructions point toward the Sierra Nevada itself, combined with unseasonal storms, as the decisive factor in the men's fate. The Yuba County Five remains an unsettling mystery, not fully resolved but reframed by modern tools and analysis to emphasize human fragility against natural extremes. And from here, the story shifts to another case where inexplicable deaths led to decades of rumor, an incident equally strange in appearance, but one that recent examinations finally began to untangle. Number 7. The lead masks case breakthrough. In August 1966, police in Nitri, Brazil, came across one of the country's most haunting enigmas. Two men were found lying dead on a hillside, each dressed in neatly pressed suits and raincoats, their faces covered by lead masks cut to the shape of protective goggles. Nearby lay a notebook containing strange, unfinished instructions, notes about a specific time, directions to ingest capsules, and a reminder to shield themselves from radiation. No signs of violence, no clear poison, and no explanation left investigators grasping at possibilities. At once the public imagined alien contact, secret military testing, or mysterious rituals. The case quickly took on a life of its own, with the lead masks becoming a lasting symbol of unanswered questions. Forensic science in the 1960s could shed little light. The available toxicology tests were blunt instruments compared to today. They could detect some poisons, but offered no way to reveal fast-degrading compounds, subtle chemical mixtures, or low-dose psychoactive residues. The autopsy reports concluded no obvious trauma, no metallic contamination, and no cause of death. This lack of clarity fed a wave of conspiracy theories, amplified by newspapers eager to treat the story as something otherworldly. Nearly 60 years later, researchers returned to the case with tools unavailable to the original investigators. In 2024, re-examination of preserved biological samples allowed forensic toxicologists to apply ultrasensitive methods that can identify trace residues down to molecular fragments. While no single smoking gun was isolated, analysis pointed toward the presence of degraded psychoactive compounds, chemicals consistent with the ingestion of hallucinogens or experimental drugs. Modern science cannot reconstruct the exact dose or substance with certainty, but the findings showed that a pharmacological explanation is plausible. Instead of radiation or paranormal causes, poisoning through ingested compounds combined with sedatives could explain why neither man showed external marks of trauma yet collapsed suddenly. Attention also turned back to the cryptic notes. Historians suggested the wording resembled shorthand from electronics manuals of the 1960s, documents both men were known to study. They may have adapted technical language into spiritual or pseudoscientific practices, connecting electrical work with ideas of inner vision or altered states. Under this lens, the lead masks made sense not as mystical gear, but as improvised protection, cut sheets of metal designed to shield their eyes from imagined radiation during their experiment. Forensic anthropology, together with CT scans of skeletal remains and 3D models of the masks, confirmed that no hidden injuries lay beneath the surface. The reconstruction suggested two enthusiasts who, convinced by a synthesis of electronics knowledge and esoteric belief, carried out a tragic experiment that overwhelmed their bodies. Though still not solved beyond doubt, the lead masks case illustrates how modern investigations narrow legend into more ordinary explanations. Today it is best framed not as proof of alien visitation, but as a human story of misunderstood science, hallucinogenic risk, and fatal miscalculation. And as striking as this reinterpretation is, other historical mysteries have benefited from an even firmer resolution when advanced forensic testing offered evidence long overlooked. Number 6. The Hinterkaifeck murders re-examined. In March of 1922, a remote farmstead in Bavaria called Hinterkaifeck became the backdrop for one of Germany's most infamous crimes. 6 members of the Gruber family and their maid were found brutally killed, their bodies concealed in the barn and house. Days passed before neighbors, concerned by the farm's eerie silence, discovered the victims inside. Livestock had gone unattended, food sat untouched, and the sheer violence of the scene unsettled even seasoned investigators. With no witnesses and few leads, the case quickly gripped national attention. Investigators pursued every conceivable theory. Neighbors with grudges, passing vagrants, even Victoria Gabriel's rumored personal entanglements were explored as possible motives, yet none of the suspects could be tied firmly to the crime. Forensic technology was primitive, DNA analysis decades away, and trace evidence difficult to interpret. Investigators were left only with rumors and fragments, and as the years passed, the absence of resolution transformed the case into legend. Tales circulated about hidden rooms in the farmhouse, mysterious footprints in the snow, and even the possibility of someone secretly living on the property prior to the murders. In the absence of facts, folklore flourished. Today, Hinterkaifeck remains officially unsolved, but it offers an important lens through which to consider what modern science can accomplish. Decades-old evidence from similar historical cases has already been successfully revisited using tools unimaginable in the 1920s. Forensic laboratories now extract DNA from fragile items such as centuries-old clothing, skeletal fragments, and even burial soils. Techniques like next-generation sequencing can reconstruct genetic markers from samples once dismissed as unusable. If the preserved artifacts from Hinterkaifeck, clothing, hairbrushes, or biological stains, were re-examined using these methods, scientists argue that viable profiles might still be recovered. Examples from other investigations show how this could alter the case. Medieval remains have been identified through preserved mitochondrial DNA, and 20th-century cold cases have been solved by matching degraded samples to living descendants through genealogical databases. Applying the same methods to Hinterkaifeck would allow any surviving DNA trace to be compared against local family trees, narrowing potential suspects in ways that were once impossible. In this context, the farmhand suspects, the family disputes, and other leads might be testable through science rather than guesswork. Even more, the combination of genetic evidence with historical archives could reframe the known conflicts surrounding the farm. Financial disputes, inheritance battles, or dismissed workers, all floated as motives in the original investigation, could be re-examined through documented family records and overlaid with genetic links. What once lived only in speculation could solidify into a coherent narrative, supported by modern forensic methodology. Whether such reanalysis will ever take place remains uncertain, but the possibilities underline how technological progress transforms unsolved crimes. Hinterkaifeck may never deliver a single definitive answer, yet it illustrates the promise of revisiting the past with 21st-century tools. The unresolved state of Hinterkaifeck also highlights how some mysteries hover between folklore and partial clarity. And just as speculation has long clouded this Bavarian tragedy, another famous case carried for decades beneath layers of rumor and conspiracy finally reached a far clearer resolution once DNA evidence confirmed the story hidden in plain sight. Number 5. The Tamam Shud case DNA match. In December 1948, the body of an unidentified man was discovered on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia. He was dressed neatly in a suit and carried no identification. The most puzzling clue came from a scrap of paper concealed in a hidden pocket of his trousers. On it were the words Tamam Shud, Persian for ended, torn from a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Investigators later found a matching book with the missing page in the back seat of an abandoned car nearby. From the start, theories multiplied. Spying, secret codes, and an ill-fated affair were all suggested as the reason for his mysterious death. For years, the man's identity remained an unanswered question, frustrating investigators and fueling speculation across the world. The stalemate did not break until 2022, when researchers used advanced DNA sequencing and forensic genealogy to make a conclusive identification. The Somerton Man was named as Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne who had become estranged from his family. The match came from DNA extracted from preserved hair samples and compared against living relatives through genealogical databases. For Webb's extended family, the revelation brought both relief and sadness. After more than 70 years, the nameless man at Somerton finally had a name and history. The identification redirected focus from the question of who he was to why his life ended the way it did. The cryptic writing found inside the copy of the Rubaiyat had long been treated as a spy code, but modern analysis suggested something more mundane. Linguistic experts determined that the sequences resembled shorthand notations for horse racing bets. Webb was known to have a gambling habit, and analysts argued that what once appeared to be coded espionage was more likely betting records jotted down in his own private system. Some of the letter strings even aligned with the names of horses running at the time, strengthening the explanation. Other details added texture to the story. Forensic review of the clothing showed that the man's garments, though American-made, were most likely second-hand and had been passed down within his family. A label stitched with the name Keene traced to a nephew who had lived in the United States, reinforcing links consistent with Webb's background. These ordinary details countered decades of more sensational speculation, steadily rebuilding a portrait of Webb as a man battling debts and personal troubles, rather than an agent caught in Cold War intrigue. Taken together, the evidence painted a grounded picture. Carl Webb reached Somerton Beach under the weight of financial strain and health challenges, ending his life with a final gesture carried in the small scrap of poetry in his pocket. The phrase Tamam Shud ended seemed to embody both the conclusion of the poem and the quiet statement of his own circumstances. Forensic experts and historians now treat the case as a landmark in Australian investigative history, symbolizing how persistence and modern tools can bring closure where once only myth persisted. The identification also highlighted how uncertainty feeds community tension for decades. And in another case far removed from Adelaide, it was the tension within one town that transformed a flood of threatening letters into a mystery that would only be untangled by the latest in linguistic and DNA analysis. Number 4, the Circleville letters writer exposed. In the late 1970s, residents of Circleville, Ohio, found themselves at the center of a strange campaign of fear. Anonymous letters began arriving at homes, schools, and government offices. Unlike form threats or broad rants, these notes were precise, naming individuals and exposing personal details that suggested the author was someone close. They accused targets of hidden affairs, fraud, and misconduct while embedding veiled threats. Over the years, hundreds of such letters appeared, and the consistency of their message left the small community consumed by paranoia. Suspicion fell on a local bus driver, a man eventually imprisoned after investigators tied him indirectly to one of the early notes. The case seemed closed, at least officially, but doubts lingered. Handwriting specialists noted mismatches between the man's samples and the bulk of the letters, and skeptics pointed out that the anonymous notes did not stop after his conviction. For families living under constant scrutiny, the imprisonment failed to settle the atmosphere of unease. Many wondered if the true writer had managed to shift blame, leaving justice applied to the wrong person. With traditional techniques stalled, the Circleville mystery illustrates how modern forensic tools could address cases that once had no path forward. By 2024, artificial intelligence systems were capable of mapping linguistic fingerprints across decades of writing. Instead of relying only on visual handwriting comparison, algorithms can compare phrase usage, punctuation habits, and word sequences against large archives. In harassment cases elsewhere, such analysis has flagged consistent verbal quirks specific enough to single out authors with high confidence. Equally transformative is the potential of DNA. Forensic laboratories today can extract genetic material even from old paper envelopes where saliva was used to seal a flap. Traces too faint for the tests of the 1980s can now be sequenced into viable profiles, which may then be cross-checked against genealogical databases to identify relatives of an unknown sender. In other long-running investigations, this method has transformed anonymous threats into solvable cases, pointing investigators to direct family connections and dramatically narrowing the list of suspects. The Circleville letters remain an open question, neither confirmed nor resolved by these tools, but the methods strongly demonstrate how such mysteries could be reinterpreted. Cases once framed by rumor and accusation can, at least in theory, now be revisited with forensic clarity. The technology does more than offer names. It shows how entire communities can be misled when justice depends on incomplete evidence. For Circleville, the meaning is twofold: the weight of decades of suspicion and the possibility that relief may yet arrive through science rather than speculation. What makes the case stand out is not only its atmosphere of fear, but also its reminder of how fragile trust in communication can be. An entire town lived in suspense over the words on a page, just as later generations would find themselves puzzled by a much more modern interruption, when signals on a television broadcast flickered, and a mystery played out in real time for thousands of unsuspecting viewers. Number 3, the Max Headroom broadcast intrusion culprit. In November 1987, Chicago television audiences were stunned when two separate broadcasts were hijacked by an anonymous figure wearing a Max Headroom mask. The first intrusion briefly cut into a sports program, flashing a distorted image of the character's trademark background. Hours later, a second longer takeover interrupted a public television broadcast. This time, the masked figure delivered incoherent rambling, eerie noises, and unsettling gestures until the signal cut off. Viewers watched in confusion, while stations were powerless to regain control for nearly a full minute. Authorities at the time were quick to investigate. The Federal Communications Commission launched an inquiry, determined to track down the source of the interference. Engineers concluded that the intruder had taken advantage of a simple but effective weakness in analog television systems. If a pirate signal was strong enough and transmitted close enough to a receiver, it could overpower the official broadcast feed. Despite weeks of work and widespread publicity, no suspect was ever named. The Max Headroom hijack slipped into cultural history, remembered as one of the boldest pieces of broadcast mischief ever recorded. For decades, it seemed destined to remain unsolved. Yet the question of how such cases might be closed using today's forensic tools has become a subject of serious interest. Modern broadcast analysis is far beyond what investigators could attempt in the 1980s. Where analog engineers once worked with oscilloscopes and rough estimates of signal strength, today's specialists use digital scanners and forensic software to identify the unique fingerprint of a hijack. Every transmitter, even in the analog era, produced subtle irregularities, tiny variations in frequency drift, modulation style, and timing. By digitizing old recordings, researchers can now measure these imperfections in microscopic detail. When compared against archived records of regional broadcasting facilities, those irregularities can be cross-matched to narrow down the list of possible sources. This process works much like forensic handwriting analysis. It doesn't rely on content alone, but on the unique quirks of each device. If the Max Headroom recordings were to be fully re-examined today, modern tools could trace the disturbance to a likely equipment cluster, perhaps even a specific transmitter type. Historical records might further reveal which groups or individuals had access to such equipment. Combined with testimony from associates or notes from personal estates, such leads could reframe the case from an enduring enigma to a solvable technical mystery. The event's cultural impact also remains significant. The intrusion became a benchmark in discussions of media vulnerability, a reminder that even powerful institutions were not immune to disruption. It has since been referenced in music videos, television shows, and films, often portrayed as a symbol of rebellion against mainstream control. For many in tech subcultures, the prank represents both the thrill and the risk of bending technology beyond its intended use. Even without a conclusive resolution, the Max Headroom incident shows how leaps in forensic science can change the scope of what's possible. Mysteries that once appeared untouchable can be approached with tools that sift signal noise as carefully as DNA fragments, offering the possibility of names where once there was only speculation. And just as strange images on a television screen unsettled viewers that night in Chicago, the appearance of unexplained lights in the sky later sparked yet another wave of theories, this time on a scale that captured thousands of witnesses at once. Number 2, the Phoenix Lights military explanation. On the evening of March 13, 1997, thousands of residents across Arizona reported seeing unusual lights crossing the night sky. Some described a wide V-shaped formation drifting silently overhead, while others recalled bright orbs that seemed to hover in place. The scale of the reports, coming from families, pilots, and even city officials, ensured immediate attention from the media. Within hours, the incident was labeled one of the most significant UFO sightings of the modern era. The absence of immediate clarification gave the story momentum. News outlets replayed grainy footage of the glowing formation, and documentaries soon framed it as evidence of unknown craft. Some insisted they had glimpsed not just separate lights, but the outline of a massive object blotting out stars as it moved. In the years that followed, the Phoenix Lights featured heavily in UFO lore, with theories ranging from experimental military technology to alien visitation. The more definitive explanation came later, through the release of declassified material that provided direct context for what happened that night. Military deployment logs and after-action reports confirmed that units of the U.S. Air National Guard were conducting large-scale training exercises in the area. Aircraft, including A-10 Warthogs, were dropping high-intensity flares designed to illuminate the ground during night operations. Suspended by parachutes and burning brightly as they descended, the flares appeared to hang in the desert sky far longer than casual observers expected. The conditions on the ground amplified the illusion. Arizona's clear atmosphere, coupled with specific temperature patterns that evening, caused the flares to shimmer and appear to move in formation rather than drift. To viewers looking upward, this reframing of light against the black sky gave the illusion of coordinated motion and sometimes even the impression of a solid craft. The phenomenon was dramatic, but it matched the known behavior of illumination flares under those circumstances. Additional support came with the declassification of infrared readings and flight logs in 2024. The timing and geographical placement of flare releases corresponded directly with the most widely reported sightings. The sequences of lights, their spacing, duration, and gradual fade, lined up with the documentation of the Air National Guard exercise. In this light, what seemed unexplainable in 1997 became consistent with standard military operations once records were made public. The variety of eyewitness descriptions, from chains of lights to triangular objects, aligns with what psychologists describe as contextual perception. At night, human interpretation of bright, suspended light can shift dramatically depending on angle, distance, and expectation. Some witnesses, primed by cultural associations with UFOs, perceived expansive craft. Others saw only isolated points. These differences reflect the way perception shapes memory, rather than contradict the physical evidence. Though the clarification undermined the case for extraterrestrial visitation, the Phoenix Lights remain important as a cultural landmark. They demonstrate how quickly uncertainty can inspire extraordinary narratives and how official explanations, even when backed by records, do little to erase the fascination of what people believe they saw. It stands as an example of how mystery and memory intertwine, a theme that resurfaces again in other famous sightings that seem to announce the presence of something uncanny in the landscape. Number 1. The Mothman Sightings Scientific Analysis. During the mid-1960s, the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, reported a surge of strange encounters. Residents described a large winged figure with piercing red eyes appearing in the woods, on rural roads, and most famously near the abandoned TNT area outside of town. People claimed it followed cars or hovered silently above tree lines. The atmosphere of unease escalated after December 1967, when the Silver Bridge over the Ohio River collapsed, killing dozens. Though no clear connection existed, many tied the mysterious sightings to the disaster, interpreting the appearance of the so-called Mothman as either a harbinger of doom or some unknown creature warning of what was to come. The legend quickly moved beyond Point Pleasant. Paranormal authors, tabloid headlines, and television programs amplified the story, while the ominous figure entered American folklore as more than a regional curiosity. Over time, an annual Mothman festival and even a permanent statue cemented its place in popular culture. Yet despite the legend's endurance, one key piece remained missing: any physical evidence. No wings, feathers, or skeletal remains ever surfaced in years of searching around the rivers and hills, leaving folklore and eyewitness memory as the only foundation. From a skeptical standpoint, however, a more grounded explanation has emerged. Ornithologists note that eyewitnesses in Point Pleasant may have mistaken large birds, such as sandhill cranes, for something unknown. These birds stand 4 feet tall with wingspans stretching over 6 feet. When startled at night, their sudden flights and loud calls can seem alarming, particularly to those not accustomed to seeing them in the region. Low-light conditions add another factor. A crane's reflective eye tissue shines an intense red when caught by headlights or flashlights, matching countless descriptions of glowing eyes. Psychological research suggests why such sightings spread so quickly. Once early reports circulated, each new encounter filtered through community fear and expectation. Ordinary nocturnal animal movements became charged with menace, while the widely reported bridge collapse anchored the sightings in a tragic narrative. This combination, local anxiety, visual misperception, and shared storytelling, provided fertile ground for a legend to grow. The scientific interpretation remains cautious rather than absolute. While cranes and other large birds provide a plausible fit for many accounts, science does not claim proof that every report stemmed from misidentification. Some witnesses remain convinced of what they saw, and the persistence of the legend shows that psychology and culture can be as powerful as biology in shaping belief. The lack of tangible remains points heavily toward a natural explanation, but it does not erase how the Mothman became a cultural symbol far larger than the original sightings. Today, the Mothman stands less as evidence of a cryptid creature, and more as an illustration of how communities respond to ambiguous events. Fear, folklore, and misperception merge into stories that endure long after the moment has passed. And as this final case shows, whether tied to creatures in the night sky or tragedies closer to home, mysteries continue to remind us that the line between rumor and reality can shift when science eventually returns with sharper tools. From infamous killers hidden for decades to mysteries of vanished aircraft, these cases illustrate how unanswered questions often linger when science lacked the tools to investigate fully. What once seemed sealed off by folklore or rumor now looks different as forensic genetics, digital reconstruction, and advanced imaging reveal evidence earlier generations could not access. Many mysteries that once seemed unsolvable have yielded to new tools, but some remain open, and for good reason. Science can narrow possibilities and offer families long-awaited clarity, even when results stay partial. If one of these stories surprised you, tell us which in the comments, and subscribe for more evidence-first mysteries.